Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 3i Podcast. I'm Mike Launchman, and with me today is my friend Terry McDaniel. Terry is an experienced educator with more than 50 years of serving students and other education professionals. He obtained his PhD from Indiana State and has recently retired as a professor there. He has been a mentor to me throughout my career, and I'm really excited today to talk to him about what he's currently seeing in the K-12 world. I know you've been in the field for over 50 years now, but I'm really kind of curious, what's the difference you've seen in the last 10 years on what the job was maybe 10 years ago versus what the job is today, and really focus on educational leadership?
Mike, the job's really changed in the past 10 years. Things have happened in society, things have happened in education that have really made things different. I don't think people have realized what happened with COVID, for example. We went into a situation in schools where things were going fairly smoothly, and then suddenly we're shutting schools down. Mm-hmm. We're looking at how are we going to continue education? Are we going to bring students in? Are we going to try to do this through virtual teaching? What are we going to do? Schools struggled with that because they didn't have the assistance that they needed at that point because no one really knew what to do. We'd not been through a pandemic of this nature before. So schools struggled with that. And then what made it even more difficult was we began to see our stakeholders, and in the community especially, say, we want this, where another group would say, we want that. One group would say, bring our kids into school, that's where they need to be. And others were saying, we don't want our kids exposed to COVID. Right. And so the struggle was really great with that, leaving schools not knowing what to do, trying to make the best decisions. And then the result was they made a lot of their stakeholders mad. Again, one thing we know with education is you can never please everyone.
Right.
That's a very common point. When we started going through that, we then began to see the extreme groups come into play. The Purple for Parents, the Moms for Liberty, people coming out and saying things that they never said before to school officials, voicing your opinion and being very loud about it. And of course, when we talk about the internet, talk about things like Facebook and social media coming into place, parents could voice their opinion where other people could hear it. And then we suddenly saw groups joining together, which made it more difficult. And in a lot of cases, even school board members were being elected on some of these platforms. I've worked with schools where they had Purple for Parent school board members that identified themselves with that and connected with other Purple for Parent school board members in other districts, which really caused a problem. We saw groups come into the school system at board meetings and announce that they wanted this and they wanted that as for parent rights. We begin to see parents come in and talk about what goes into a library and what doesn't. All of that's made the work even more extreme because now we're trying to work with a minority that's so vocal that it's hard to meet the majority needs of the school corporations.
There are very few people in this state that probably talk to more superintendents than I do, but you're probably one of them, so it's kind of nice to have your perspective here as well. One of the things that I've encountered a lot of is just the difference in board meetings in the last 2 years. I know of certain superintendents that have told me either them or one of their peers has actually had to be escorted to their car. COVID has created a lot of anger among individuals in this time period. Do you have any insight on that, how it's impacted even board meetings?
I'm going to start out by saying this, Mike. I feel bad for board members overall.
Yeah.
It's a thankless job. You're going to make maybe $2,000, $2,500 a year, whatever's set by the standard of Indianapolis Public School school board members. That's the statute. Yeah. They're going to take a job for 4 years. Parents, stakeholders, people that want to complain are going to call board members and complain about things. And then when they come to meetings, suddenly they're bombarded with all these issues. And a typical school board member coming in hasn't had the training that they need to handle that. A lot of new school board members think, my job is to take care of those issues. My job is to address those, which one, puts a lot more stress on the school board member, but two, makes it very, very difficult for the superintendent and for the principals of the building to try to run their buildings.
You mentioned board trainings. I think one of the things that has severely impacted is you have a number of board members that were elected last term, right, that have been sitting in these seats, and they then inherited COVID within their first year.
One thing to think about with COVID, and you know this because you work with schools all the time, even more than I do, is that because of COVID and because of having the virtual instruction and because of having kids out of the building and not facing teachers every single day, our academic achievement scores dropped during that period of time.
Right.
Boy, that's evidence for everyone out there that wants to criticize schools, especially public schools. Oh, look at our scores. With COVID, everything went down. Beyond the control of most school corporations to do anything about it. And we knew that was going to happen, but how do you justify that to a public that's not aware of those factors?
Well, I think one thing that we were talking about, and we've talked over the years, is being an educational leader or even a teacher right now sometimes can be a thankless job. When you had all of this go down in COVID and you had these conversations and the heat from both sides of the arguments on whether to send kids, not to send kids, how teachers are able to respond to turning to virtual overnight. And I think education is really suffering right now. And you're seeing that in our local universities that are reporting lowest records ever of teaching candidates that are entering the field. I talked with a superintendent today. He's 3 special ed teachers short in his district. We're talking a great community, a strong rural district that is doing some amazing thing for kids, but he's 3 special ed teachers short.
Ironically, you talk about that. Little anecdote, I recently dealt with a school corporation looking for a superintendent because, that's what I do these days.
Yeah.
And the board said to me, can you find a superintendent who can teach math? Because we desperately need a math teacher. My research, and you've helped me with this over the years. Yeah. We've seen a teacher shortage, especially in foreign language, math, special education, English, and even elementary, which made the top 5 the last time I did my research. Mm-hmm. You compound that by when you lose teachers, you also lose candidates to become administrators. I can't tell you how many times I've had people call me, and I don't even do this, call me and say, can you find me a high school principal? Mm-hmm. Because people don't want to be a high school principal. And our superintendent searches, where we used to see 20, 25, 30 even times applicants, now sometimes we're lucky to get 10 or 12.
You and I talk, and you've said to me multiple times, do you have anyone you know that could be a high school principal here? Yes. Do you have anyone that you know that wants to be a superintendent here? But one of the things that we're also seeing is, you mentioned elementary ed, which is really fascinating because I remember back when I was an assistant superintendent back in like 2010 to 2015 era realm, I'd get 30, 35, 40 apps for every elementary job I have right now. And now you're telling me that there's a shortage in this area. What might you contribute some of that to?
The research has told us many things, but what we find is, one, it costs you in an Indiana public institution to get a teaching 4-year degree over $100,000 in that 4 years. During those 4 years, you have very little opportunity to make money, so that's stressful. Your starting salary, as we know in the state of Indiana, just finally topped $40,000 for a teacher. You can go to a 4-year college and get an engineering degree and start at $90,000 to $100,000 with no problem at all. If you're a young person, what do you look at? You look at money first, you look at benefits second, and then you look at happiness in the job third. Well, compare $40,000 to $90,000 or $100,000. What do you want to do in terms of a job? Then what we see is even these young people that say, yes, I'm dedicated, I want to be a teacher, they get in there, and the first thing they discover is these kids are different than they used to be. Mm-hmm. It used to be that kids behaved and their parents backed them up. Now it's just the opposite. Kids misbehave and parents don't back them up. And I'm generalizing.
Yeah.
Always know there's exceptions to that. Give you a quick example of that. My brother-in-law drives a school bus.
Oh, Lord, that's all you had to say was school bus, but go ahead.
Yeah, that's another old story we could get in for another hour. He said last week, I had a kid kick the back window out of my bus. And I said, well, that's terrible. And he said, he's usually a good kid. I don't know what happened. And I said, so I'm sure that the school's going to make the kid pay for the window or his parents. He says, well, first of all, he lives with his grandparents. So, that's an issue. And he said, second, no, they won't make him pay. The school will pay. Where's the accountability? And this sounds terrible, but we just let a high school student, kick a window out of a school bus, which is very expensive.
Yeah.
You can't run that school bus while the window's out of it, so the bus is down for 2 or 3 days. And what's the consequence? There's no consequence.
Right.
And we're seeing more and more of that where schools are unable to enforce their consequence.
Well, and I also think that one thing you touched on earlier is the drop in the support that parents might be providing has also been something to kind of consider. Now, I also want to reiterate, you're talking in some generalities.
I am very
You, of course, are not talking about that there are no parents out there that support public education or that anything like that. That's not your message. Your message is just you're seeing an increased level of lack of support, but you still know that there are amazing people out there providing exceptional support for schools.
The majority, yes. I think still the majority of parents are supportive. But the issue I think you have to think about is if you have a class of 25 students and you have one student that causes a ruckus or is out of control in the classroom, you affect the education of the other 24. In the past, we had the ability to control that one child. We're seeing less and less ability to do that, which penalizes all the other kids in the class.
Well, I will say this, like one of the things that you mentioned a little bit with regards to superintendents call you and talk to you about micromanagement. And not being able to kind of do their job and things like that. You have a situation where every single decision an educational leader is making, you're making some people happy and you're upsetting some people, right? They don't remember the things you did that made them happy. They remember the things that ticked them off a little bit, right? Well, over the course of your 3-year tenure, that is your initial contract for these superintendents, you're seeing your level of support go from maybe 95% excitement to now like, we can't wait to get rid of him. I told someone this the other day. When a majority of your board wasn't the board that hired you, it's time for you to start thinking about where am I going to land next? Because we're seeing the tenure of superintendents decrease dramatically. You want to expand on that and your thoughts a little?
Well, I think you covered it very, very well. You always go through a honeymoon period with your new board, but we have to remember in the state of Indiana, every 2 years there's a board election. Right. And in some districts, that means new people coming on the board, and every other election year, a majority of the board's going to be up for election because they're 4-year terms. I do know superintendents that in 4 years are working for an entirely different school board. No one hired them. And another point that you made that I thought was excellent. Human nature, we can do 100 good things. You do one bad thing and people are going to remember the bad thing, the thing that you messed up, the thing that you screwed up. And that's the one that sticks in their mind. And, then superintendents at some point sometimes have to say, it's time for me to look for another job. The average life as a superintendent in a corporation right now is somewhere around 3.5 years. That means,
and that's on the high side.
And that's on the high side at times. And you got to remember, you've got some superintendents that do last for 10, 12, 15 years at times. So that when you think of that, your average really has to come down.
Yeah, because you have some outliers that have been in their current job for 20 years plus.
Exactly.
Like there are some that have been able to do that. But you also, I think you have more that are in the opposite case where they don't even get to finish their 3-year initial contract. Try being that superintendent that has to shut down one of your 4 elementaries and then do something that anyone could even have an ounce of teeth into you on. They will multiply that because you just shut down their neighborhood school where their grandmother went to school, their mother went to school, they went to school, and they want their kids to go to school there.
The old adage is try to build a school or close a school. That's a job killer. That's the old saying for superintendents. You don't build a school, you don't close a school. When you close a school, and I've had students write dissertations about this, you close a community.
Yeah.
Think of some of those little towns that had a school and suddenly, because of consolidation, the enrollment drops to a point that you've got to close it. That community dies. The other trend that's happening right now is instead of the school dying, when they close that school, that people sometimes rally around that point and suddenly you have a charter school in place of it. A la Duggar, for example.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to worry about that. The buck always stops with the superintendent. No matter what happens, if the basketball coach is lousy, if the high school principal makes a bad decision, if a teacher does something in the classroom that's wrong, it all falls back to the superintendent. He or she is the final person that's responsible for all that. So when you compound issues that could happen in a school corporation beyond your control, that can cost you your job. I've seen it happen several times.
Since you work with so many school boards, since there seems to be a lot of turnover, we've established that. What do you typically hear boards telling you they want in their next superintendent?
I would start off by saying that the most common theme is their culture. It's hard for school board members to sometimes look at candidates who come from a large district if they're small, urban district if they're rural, or vice versa. Then in terms of specific skills, it's always very interesting. The first one that pops up is we want someone that's going to be here 10 to 15 years. And I always laugh at that thinking, but you as a board member probably won't be here in 10 or 15 years. I understand why they're asking that, because they want tenure, they want longevity in terms of the superintendent and making sure that, there's not a change all the time. And sometimes I'll say to boards, would you rather have someone here for 10 years that just moves things along and manages? Or do you want a leader that's really going to be progressive and gets things going for you? And then they'll say, 3 years.
Yeah.
The second thing they usually ask for is, will they move here? And that's kind of interesting, too, because it's a question they cannot legally ask. Will you move here? There's a bunch of ask questions, as you well know, for any employer. But they're hoping that person will be there. I think that's a legitimate question because of several reasons. One, if you're going to represent that community, shouldn't you be a part of it? Right. If you're going to pass tax bills on building projects and referendums and that type of thing, shouldn't that affect you as well? But the irony of that is sometimes you have small rural communities that don't have any housing.
Right.
So you can't do that. Probably the third one they ask for is budget. And that's a tough one too, because, and I find it a little bit ironical when I hear boards say that as well. If you're a small district, you're not likely to attract a sitting superintendent who has built a budget.
Right.
You're going to hire someone that's a principal or an assistant superintendent that comes in and has never built a budget. And in a small district, a lot of times the superintendent has to be the one that does that. If you're in a large district, guess what? You have a business manager that builds a budget.
Yeah.
Does the superintendent have budget building skills? No.
You have CFOs that do that for you when you're in a larger district. So
yeah. So it's ironical that they ask that. And I always tell candidates in that case, I say, here's what you say. One, you have contacts. Two, if you've never done one before, you say, let's hire a consultant to help with the budget for the first couple of years until I feel comfortable with it. And that's a good strategy because you don't want to be the only set of eyes on a budget, because if you go into here and you make a mistake, you live with it for the next year. And three, then you're going to have time to learn to do that. Also, go get the IASBO training, which is a workshop that lasts for one school year, 4 or 5 sessions.
Yeah.
That's really, really good. And in 2 years, you can do the budget on your own. But those are probably the 3 things that I see the most. I'll see other things that come up. One of the questions we ask board members are, what are the 2 most important personal characteristics and or professional skills that you must have in your next superintendent?
Okay.
But we'll see things like visible
yes.
in the system.
Which might be why they're asking, will they live in the community? Because they want them more visible at the Friday night football games. They want them more involved in the Chamber of Commerce. They want...
In the buildings, be
visible in the buildings too.
Transparent, don't hide things from anyone, and strong communication skills. Now, we also usually survey stakeholders in the community and at schools.
Mm-hmm.
We survey parents, community, teachers, support staff, administrators. When we get those results back, a lot of times they'll be skewed, but the number one thing that comes up when we talk about professional skills, and you know what it is.
Go ahead.
Strategic planning.
Yeah.
The ability to lead the district. Even if the district has strategic planning, the community doesn't know what's going on, and they want someone that will lead the district in that.
So we've done strategic planning. ES Innovation has done lots of strategic planning for a number of districts throughout the state. One thing we try to do in ours is we try to make sure that we build strategic plans with school corporations that are the ground up. Because if you were coming in as superintendent and you put together a strategic plan in your first 12 months there and you did it with a small collection of individuals, it's always going to be viewed as a top-down plan. This is this new superintendent, and he's come from this district, and he wants us to be just like the district he came from, but that's not our community and not our culture, right? So what we do a little bit differently is we actually come in and we do some of the things that you were talking about. We do focus groups, we do surveys, we do instructional walkthroughs. We try to get a holistic 360. And then after we've collected all of that information, I typically will go in and present to a board and say, we believe your 3 KPAs or key priority areas are A, B, and C, and we show that ground up support for that. But I would also say this, as you start to kind of think about that, one thing we're also seeing is districts that take the time to brand the work that's going on are also demonstrating value of the educators that are doing that work. And sometimes that's a missing piece that we're seeing in our districts that don't take it that step further.
We have to remember that we're all human beings, and even if we say we don't want praise or recognition for our work, we do. Teachers, support staff, bus drivers, everyone out there needs the attaboys at times to say, you are an integral part of what we're doing. You're so important, and you're doing what we need to be done. I was at a grandparent night last night, and just to see the teacher there and people coming up and saying to her, you're really doing a good job. My kid comes home and talks about you all the time. I thought, she's getting those attaboys that she really needs at that point, that feedback. And then as I walked away, I asked myself, is she hearing that from the principal? Is she hearing that from other people in the system? And that's critical too. When we think about what's going on in a system like that, in a school corporation, the principal has to be someone that's going out and talking to teachers and complimenting them. One that, kind of going back to earlier in our discussion about why we're seeing a shortage of teachers, the biggest reason I found in my research was lack of support. And that lack of support was from the building principal. They all need that. And that's important. They're not going to be able to continue the branding unless they feel excited and good about what's going on.
Are there any other skills that you're seeing, like candidates struggle to kind of fill the board's wish list?
I think the candidates that struggle the most to get a superintendent's job are the ones that don't show their people skills.
Okay.
I don't know how many searches I've been a part of. I know
a lot.
Yeah, probably a couple hundred at this point. But when I work with boards, the end result, 95% of the time, the board is going to hire the superintendent that they feel most comfortable with as a person because of the people skills that person has. That means that they're going to be excited about it, that they can sit and talk like you and I are right now as friends, but yet have serious conversations and even argue at times, but walk away feeling satisfied that, okay, I may disagree, but I can agree to disagree and I'm comfortable with that. That they feel like that person can go out and not only talk to them that way, but every other stakeholder, every other kid in a school corporation the same way. That they're going to make everyone feel comfortable in what they're doing. And the candidates that can't do that are the ones that boards shy away from.
Well, I'll give you a great example. You and I have had conversations about superintendents that were so far ahead of the other candidate going in, but then they went out to dinner with the board and the board didn't connect with them, and they said, we just didn't feel like that was the right person for us. So
we encourage boards by saying, don't fall in love on the first date. And what we mean by that is, in that first interview, when you're asking set questions, the same questions of every applicant, because we think that's really important to do the first round, you may fall in love with someone because they're giving you strong answers, but you've not met that person outside of interview questions. When you get to the second round, we recommend things like have dinner with them, sit down and just chew the fat, take them on a tour of buildings, have them talk to administrators, get them in informal situations. Why? Because that's what makes a superintendent. And when they can sit down and have those informal chats, the really good ones, they're the ones that could sit down and just make you feel comfortable. And we all know people like that. You sit down, just enjoy what you're doing, having a good time with it. You feel confident that person. You see that they have ability to talk to people and win people over, that Pied Piper effect, sometimes we like to call it. But then you see others that are tight. They can't respond. I'm thinking one candidate you and I both know that went through this recently.
That will remain nameless.
We won't name the person, of course. But, and the board said, no.
Yeah.
And I've had boards say, we thought the person in that first round was ideal, but we got the second round and no, that wasn't the person that we wanted.
Right.
So it's really those people skills, the ability to communicate. And I want to make this clear too, because I think this is real important. We're not talking introverts versus extroverts. No. You could still be an introvert and be a great superintendent because you can carry on those important conversations that we're talking about right now. There's a lot of excellent introvert superintendents across the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
My favorite in the state right now is an introvert. But just the ability to make people feel comfortable with you as a leader and know that people are going to be comfortable talking to you and feeling good.
So based on what you've said and what I've shared a little bit today, I think one of the things that I would say is for a new superintendent coming in, be active in the community, by being visible, being at events, being part of your chamber, making those connections, but definitely be active in the community and really soak up the culture of the community.
Yes.
2, make sure you don't bankrupt them. So have decent budgeting skills. If you don't know how to budget, make sure that you take the time to actually have someone help you with your budget, because that's a quick way to be fired. Showcase your personality and be a great communicator. Create a strategic plan that's fiscally responsible. You do those things, you're going to be fine. You're going to be at least really strong. If you're a brand new soup, you're going to have a much better first year. The other thing I would tell you is one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of superintendents when I have conversations with them make is the idea that they come in the first year and they want to prove themselves because they've never been a superintendent. So they try to tackle 45 things. My advice to any superintendent in the first year, pick 2. Pick 1 or 2 and do them so exceptional.
I've counseled beginning superintendents in their very first superintendency time and time again where they've called me after they got the job. And one particular, I remember, called me and he says, "Why did you get me into this?
Right.
What are you thinking? I've lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks."
I know that guy. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then he proceeded to say, "I've got all these things on my plate and I don't know what to do." And my answer was, have you prioritized what's most important? Look at those things and say, this has to be done now, but these can sit on the back burner for a while because they're not critical. Tackle those 1 or 2 things, as you said, and do those things first. And then let the other things come to you as they need to come. Don't get in a big hurry. For instance, if you're starting the school year in August, the biggest 2 things are going to be preparation of the budget and getting new personnel on board.
Right.
The rest of that can wait. Even if it's a construction project, you can work around a construction project in the beginning, but you have to have staff on the job and you have to have that budget done or you're going to be in trouble.
Right.
But prioritize in that way and you'll be fine. The only other skill I'm going to mention that we've not talked about that I think is critical, especially for a beginning superintendent, is simply just to listen. Because if you listen to those stakeholders, 2 things happen. 1, you get very well informed of what's going on from different aspects. And 2, you're also going to make your stakeholders very happy because you listen to them and they're going to be on your side in the very, very beginning. Stephen Sample, who wrote The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership, an old book, and he's long since passed away. But one of the best things that he talked about in that book was, he said, I never listen to TV or the news. I get my news from people talking to me because then I get all different perspectives of what's going on, and I can deduce what the real issue is at that point. And I think that's so valuable for a new superintendent. Just listen to what people are saying.
Well, you even said the first thing when I asked you what do boards look at most frequently, the first word out of your mouth was culture. Well, unless you take the time to listen to people, you'll never truly understand the culture that we see that's going on in your community, in the district you're trying to lead, So first of all, I really appreciate you taking the time today. We've had a great conversation, and you mentioned really briefly about prioritizing. So here's my question. I always end the podcast with the one question. It's, what are you most excited about in the next 12 months?
Are you talking on a personal or professional level?
Either way.
I'm like, well, first of all, I'm an old man, so I prioritize taking it easy and relaxing in my retirement days. But
professionally, what are you looking forward to in the next 12 months?
I want the best possible education for every kid in the state of Indiana, and that starts with a person sitting in that superintendent chair. And so as a search team member, my responsibility has to be, don't care about who the board is or how the board's made up. Can we help those school corporations find the best person to lead that school corporation into the next 20, 30, 40 years?
Yeah.
And so that's what drives me. I told the board this Tuesday night. They were talking about interviewing some of the other groups that do superintendent searches. And I said, I'll just tell you this, I wouldn't be on the university search team if I didn't think we did the very best job of all the groups. If I thought another group did better than we, then I would not be on this team.
Well, hey, Terry, I appreciate the time you've given me today, and I think you've provided a lot of value to the listeners and given them a lot to chew on.
It's been fun, Mike. I've really enjoyed it. It's a great idea of the podcast, and if you can continue to offer the wisdom and knowledge that you are offering through these podcasts to school leaders and teachers and even people that might just want to listen to it, because I think this goes beyond education. I think you're doing a great service. So I thank you for doing this and thank you for inviting me.
All right, thanks, Terry.
Yeah.